Mississippi is renowned for its rich literary culture, attracting readers, writers, and book lovers from far and wide each year to the annual Mississippi Book Festival. Right On Mississippi presents Matt Sawyer with Richard Grant, author of The Race to the Bottom of Crazy, Dispatches from Arizona, an exploration of an eccentric modern America through the lens of a writer.
Hey everyone, we're in Jackson, Mississippi at the 10th Annual Mississippi Book Festival. I'm your host, Matt Sawyer, here with illustrious author and one of my favorite authors in the world, Richard Grant. Richard, thank you for being here.
Hey, Matt. Thanks for having me.
Every time you get a book coming out, it's like I buy it and I'm like, oh God, this is exactly what I needed to read at this time. But A Race to the Bottom of Crazy, Dispatches from Arizona. In 2021, I watched a Zoom call you did about Deepest South of All. And you said that you weren't interested in writing about Arizona and kept thinking you were going to come across something. And you weren't at that time because someone asked you, like, are you ever going to write about Arizona? Well, here we are 3 years later, and you did write a book about Arizona. What changed?
Pressure from my publishers was a factor. And then it was just because I had lived in Tucson for 20 years as a young man, and my wife is from there. She was born and raised there. In 2021, I was just sort of scrambling to get us established. We had kind of a not much of a welcome home from Tucson. It was like the hottest, driest summer on record, and the mountains were on fire. And we were just drifting from one short-term rental to another, and COVID was happening, and there was lockdown. And eventually, we managed to buy a house and start making a life for ourselves. And then once sort of that was done, I started reflecting on a lot about the past, like my own personal history in Arizona, and the writer Chuck Bowden, or Charles Bowden, who was a great friend and a huge influence on me, and he was dead and gone, but his spirit was still sort of hanging around, and I just had this sort of a kind of reassessment of my younger self. I kept asking myself, who was that guy? I was kind of like a dad hitting 60, and kept seeing reminders of myself as a wild, young, reckless man. Yeah. And so I started to put together this kind of Arizona-centric memoir about my life and the different phases of my life.
Yeah, this book was so much about how much you changed.
Yeah.
Over the course of the time that you were gone, and one that was a real welcome read for me. I mean, I got into your books when you were feeling more wild, but Dispatches from Pluto was when things started shifting.
Yeah.
And this book starts with you leaving Mississippi, a place that you dearly love, to go back to a place where you had all these memories. And now you're thinking, like, yeah, what is my life going to look like when I'm no longer maximizing personal freedom?
Right.
Something that Chuck Bowden did.
Yes.
To the end of his life.
And that, yeah, I mean, I was very interested in that when I was younger, but Chuck was a terrible father, and I didn't want to be a terrible father. He pretty much abandoned his son.
Yeah.
Because it was too many breaks on his personal freedom. But I wanted to, I had my daughter late in life. I was in my early 50s, and I wanted to do a good job at it. I wanted to be a good dad. And the biggest mistake I could have done was go risk my life in some faraway part of the world like I used to. And it's like, not only would my daughter lose her father, but she'd be justified in thinking her father had been a fool. Yeah.
And I think that's what makes this book so special to me, is your recognition of that and your willingness to lean into it. There was a quote that said, you said, as a younger man, when I vowed to myself that I would never settle down and have children, I didn't understand how much love a family can generate. Even though I grew up in a loving and reasonably happy family myself, or maybe I just didn't care. That desire to establish and pursue a life of constant travel and personal freedom was so powerful that I was inclined to dismiss anything that got in its way. It had taken decades to get that out of my system, and I wouldn't trade those decades for anything. But now, as I approached 60, all the keys to my happiness were held by a 6-year-old girl and her mother. And that just summed up this story for me. And I thought about this, one of the other interviews that I watched in 2021 before I made my big leap. You gave 10 rules of writing to this group that was asking you, like, how do you write about place? And, you say, read as much as you can. You are a fool, and go down. Ask women, the importance of perseverance. I feel like this book added an 11th one to that is, what does Isabel think about all this? That's the other rule.
I'd never written from a child's perspective before, but she was a witness to and a participant in at least there's a few different storylines in this book. One is us moving back to Arizona, making a life for ourselves, and kind of connecting with old friends and connecting a lot with the landscape, because one of the main reasons I moved back was because I loved the southern Arizona landscape and getting out and hiking and camping. But this time I was introducing my daughter to these things, and plus she just has some good lines.
Some great lines.
Why waste those lines? Why not stick them in there?
What was the one about she said, sometimes when you watch the wood burning in a fire, you can make out shapes and it feels like you're in a story. You said, I like your fire story. She said, it's not my story, Daddy. The fire is telling the story and I'm telling it to you. That feels like one of those things on social media a mom would make up, to like get people watching her Instagram reels or whatever. But this is just like all the turns of phrases that she used.
No, she does have a feel for language. I don't know where she might get it from.
I know. And also the moment where you have the Chuck Bowden line of just how much he influenced your whole life. And now you have your daughter. And I was talking about this with Lisa at Lemuria, that moment where you are reading Chuck Bowden in the tent at the end of the book while your daughter is reading next to you.
Yeah.
And that summed it up. Like those two forces of your older self who you emulated Chuck, and now you're featuring Isabel in the story. It's like, how did you use this book as a way to kind of reconcile that past self and the new self that is diving more into family life and settling down?
Yeah, I mean that is this kind of undergirding theme of the whole book. So yeah, but then I've also got these sort of reporting trips that I took, which again just sort of flowed out of personal connections. Yeah, I ended up going to the world's largest machine gun shoot with a photographer that was kind of there undercover, and
that was insane.
And I have to say, my ears have never recovered. I was wearing like pretty expensive ear protection, but
yeah, I was wondering because it seemed like you were in real trouble.
I was in real trouble
with how loud that was.
You get 50 caliber machine guns and artillery pieces, and they had mini guns that are normally mounted on helicopter gunships that shoot, I think, 6,000 rounds a minute. And they had a great big Sherman tank there that was blasting away. And
I was so shocked that was real. I mean, truly, as much as I'm like not surprised by many things in America anymore, I had no idea about that. And maybe I'm misremembering. Did you say that that each person spent 6 figures on ammo or something like that?
That would be an average, yeah. Some people spent more than that. It's a rich man's hobby, machine guns.
And just
nobody else can afford the ammo.
So what's interesting about that story, though, was the person that ran the whole thing was a contradiction of what people think about Arizona. And what you're mostly writing about is it's this insane place with, a lot of like lack of gun control, pretty conservative. And can you talk about who you met that ran that and why he was such an interesting character?
His name was Ed Hope. He was in charge of the machine gun shoot. And I went up to him and I said, it's not as political as I was expecting here. And he says, yeah, that's because I'm a liberal Democrat. And most of these people I think he called them like brain dead Trump supporters. I'm like, wait, you're a liberal Democrat with machine guns? He's like, yep, I'm a retired school teacher from Flagstaff. I have 30 machine guns. I have 300 other guns. I hate the NRA. I think we need more gun control. Otherwise, they're going to, if we don't stop kids killing each other with AR-15s, they're going to take my machine guns away from me.
Yeah,
that was his argument.
I was not ready for that in the midst of everything.
But that's why I love getting out and, getting out there and getting away from the social media and everything, and just meeting the human, and because there's always surprises.
It's not ever what you expect, and that's what your stories highlight. Go out there.
I like it when stereotypes get upended,
and that was a big one. There was an author I met recently who wrote a book called Gun Curious, and he's a liberal professor, and it was about his journey into gun culture at 42 years old. He'd never owned a gun, he'd never shot a gun. And that was a really interesting thing because he teaches sociology at Wake Forest, David Yamani. And I was like, wow, what a welcome person to say, you know what? Yeah, I'm going to strip myself of these biases of how they might treat me or what I think gun culture is. and he does a great big adventure about it. And so I knew you would appreciate that because of your experience with that particular story in Arizona. But I think what the gun culture, the water issue, all of these things to me felt a lot like the cost and benefits of like maximizing freedom as a state. So the water is a good example of the ways in which it's harmful, but your friend with the sake business is where technically he wouldn't have been able to make that in Japan. So you highlight how there's a huge cost to the consequence to that freedom.
Yeah, well, let's talk a bit about that because
Yeah.
I mean, what's happened in Arizona with the groundwaters? Because the creed of Arizona is rugged individualism, as little regulation as possible, and it has a lot of benefits. But in terms of groundwater, it's like where I live in Tucson, there was an aquifer that had formed over millions of years, and there was enough water in that aquifer to support Tucson, a city of 1 million people, for 900 years. But since there's no regulations on groundwater, all these corporations came in, and that aquifer is now almost gone. And the lower it gets, the more corporations come in to get what's left of the free water that's completely unregulated. They'll grow alfalfa and cotton and pecan groves out there in the desert on this looted aquifer. And that was kind of fed into the title. The title is A Race to the Bottom of Crazy, but I was thinking like it's insane to race to the bottom of an aquifer.
Yeah.
Because human life won't be sustainable anymore. There's no other water anywhere. It's not like it rains much. It's a desert.
And that's what made the whole thing just crazy. Like I was reading this and the virtual water conversation was like, what? I didn't know that. Can you explain how international companies come in?
So west of Phoenix, there's companies from Saudi Arabia are pumping out this aquifer to grow alfalfa that will be exported to the Middle East to feed their dairy cows. The Saudis have already pumped out all their own aquifers, and they were looking around the world. Where else can we get free water to grow cattle feed? And they hit upon Arizona because it's completely unregulated and the water is free. So you're not allowed to export water out of Arizona, but alfalfa is basically virtual water. It's a very thirsty crop.
Yeah.
And the people that live there, their wells are going dry. There's big sinkholes opening up in the ground. And the Saudis it's become contentious, but they're still there,
Yeah. And
it's not just Saudi Arabia, it's some other Middle Eastern companies.
Yeah. And it was interesting. I was talking to someone while I was in near Ghost Ranch at a cafe in New Mexico, and she was there to help her father get rid of water-thirsty trees and shrubs because the state is paying people to do that on their own land.
Wow.
And so that's something I take for granted in North Carolina, where we're not worried about that. And then you read your book and you're like, wow, yeah, this is actually a ridiculous way to use water, which is just a free-for-all.
But it's also, the whole, Arizona and the American West in general was the way it was colonized was in a smash and grab for the resources. Like we killed all the bison, there was like maybe 100 left.
Yeah, it was all extreme.
It was all extreme extraction, in Arizona. Once the Apache threat had been overcome, it was just that foreign capital coming into this territory and looting the natural resources. And we mined out all the silver and copper, and now we're mining out the aquifers. But it's very short-sighted.
And I think that's what's I was just struggling to reconcile with. Is just like, how has there been no accountability for that? But it is just part of how the state is. And you highlight that. I think you even use the word, it's an improvisational place. It's a place that doesn't make any sense because people want to go there to be whatever they want. So that idea of freedom goes to the extreme at the personal and political governing level.
But then on the positive side, my friend Atsuo, he's a Japanese sake master he met a Navajo woman in Japan, and he married her, and she ended up getting him to Holbrook, Arizona, which is this bizarre kind of like dying old Route 66 town with like concrete wigwams and like giant dinosaurs everywhere and selling petrified wood. And Atsuo had always wanted to own his own sake business, but you can't do it in Japan because it's all regulated and there's no new licenses going. But Japan's a humid climate, and he thought that you needed to be in a humid climate to make sake. But he met a guy on a park bench in Holbrook, Arizona, and said, "Why don't you just give it a try? We've got good, clean water here." And so Atsuo ordered in some rice from California, and he fermented it in his garage, and he made a bunch of sake. And this sake won the gold medal at the Tokyo Sake Championships for the best sake outside Japan.
That's incredible. I love that story.
And Holbrook, to its credit, has just been super supportive of Atsuo, and they've been fantastic. So he's like Arizona is where I found my American dream.
And it's interesting because it's another example of sometimes you got to give people a chance. Like, I mean, not every town would have been that supportive, but he found it.
Yeah.
And he stuck with it. He didn't leave once.
He's a super nice guy, which helps.
Yeah, that's true. You do want to support nice people. But I just thought that was a good counter to, yes, there are so many bad things about people expressing their freedom and having the freedom to do what
also,
they want.
He had tried in the Seattle area, but it was so much red tape and regulations, and no one would lend him money, and he couldn't get a license. Holbrook was like, "It's Arizona. You can pretty much do what you want here."
Well, and I was talking about this with Kate Medley, who has a photography book about Southern gas stations.
Yeah, I know that book. I like that book.
It's incredible, but one of the things she highlights in the book is just how immigrants often go into food because of the lack of red tape comparative to other industries that, you can actually start a restaurant business. And even where I live, most of my favorite things I eat are not, like Appalachian.
Mm-hmm.
So we got great Thai restaurants. We have great Mexican food trucks that are authentic because of all of the people that have immigrated to our part of the world. And I love that. But it just shows that sometimes the red tape in our country is too much, particularly for people with maybe language barriers or just not knowing how to navigate the bureaucratic mess of starting a business. So I just loved that story. And I also think in that same vein, you mentioned this years ago when leaving, that with Isabel, one thing you were worried about here compared to Arizona is culture of conformity. And just in the sense of, I think you mentioned like, oh yeah, you're going to go to the same universities and maybe dress the same. And even though there was a loss of leaving Pluto and Jackson and going there was some element of like, well, there might be more chance for personal freedom of expression there that she wouldn't have had here. So that's another positive.
Yeah. I mean, that was one of our reasons for going for sure, was that maybe people will argue with me about this, but I think there's the pressure to conform to the cultural norm for your class and race in Mississippi is certainly a lot stronger than it is in Arizona, where there isn't really a cultural norm to conform to. You can be whoever you want to be, at least in theory.
Yeah, and that's why people move there.
Yeah,
because it just feels like there isn't a thing to ascribe to. Oh, I don't have to be this way. I mean, you even said that there are so many ways of being, but you felt that in the Delta too.
Yeah, I mean, less so in the Delta, but it's quite easy to be an eccentric in the Delta, and even easier than that in Natchez.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I thought that was an interesting through line of just like, yeah, there are the consequences, there's the positives, and then the beauty. I mean, just being in the Southwest last week.
Yeah, I mean, it's staggeringly beautiful.
Having read your book just before I left, it really, the line that got me was your desire to, I don't know if it was intensify your senses, but it was that we have all of our senses dulled by computers and phones, and even just how fast we move through the world. So can you talk about how, since you've moved to Arizona, it's helped you maybe reclaim some of those senses that you've lost?
Yeah, I mean, it's been quite deliberate, and I guess I feel like our senses offer the last honest connection to the living world. It's like so much of how we operate is mediated, it's shot through with like marketing, technology, that if you get out in these, I mean, a place I love is they have, the landscape there is you've got cactus desert, 2,500 feet with the big armed saguaro cacti that, I mean, I love those things.
Yeah.
And then you get a bit higher up in elevation, you get these savanna-like grasslands that reminded me of when I was in East Africa and the Serengeti. And then you've got these 10,000 foot mountain ranges that rise up out of the deserts and the grasslands into these, they call them sky islands.
Yeah.
And there's pine forests and bears and jaguars and ocelots in these mountains.
It's incredible.
And just to go and spend a few days without a phone and just get your senses tuning into your surroundings is something that you can. Well, it felt like an honest connection to a living world, which is something that is becoming rare.
It's hard to do. And there's not many places to do it. Was it Chuck that told you where to do that 80-mile? Was it an 80-mile hike? There was a really long hike you took through that desert.
Yeah, I was when I was young. Yeah, I think it was 80 miles by myself through the desert with a backpack.
But that's exactly what you're talking about. It's like, how many people get a chance to do that anymore? Yeah. And I loved that part of the book because it was truly you trying to really tap into like, okay, let's just, you mentioned the ringing went out of your ears.
I mean, if you are out there, especially in the desert, whereas there's a kind of a vast silence, it usually happens around day 3. Your senses just start blossoming, and when you get out there in the silence, you realize that your ears are ringing from urban noise, and that ringing stays for about 2 days, and it stops, and then the silence becomes really intense. And if you just sit still, you can hear this sort of faint humming sound, and that's your blood moving around your body. But we never get to hear that because we're surrounded by noise and our ears are dulled.
Yeah.
And the same thing happens with all the other senses, like your eyes start to see much more clearly. They start to see much more.
Yeah, you mentioned the peripheral things you pick up on because ironically the lack of focus on one screen allows you to see even things that just start moving, birds flying, lizards, whatever.
Yeah, because our peripheral vision shuts down because we look forward in tunnel vision at a screen or a road or a book. Whereas you take that all away, the peripheral vision starts to engage and your whole field of vision gets wider and much more sensitive to movement and breaks in patterns. So you just become a lot more alert.
And it's a bizarre feeling. It shouldn't be as strange as it is to us, but it is. But
that's how humans lived until very recently for, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of years.
Same thing with the stars. Like my brother lives in Minneapolis and he was down in Taos and we were well outside of Taos staying in a house. My parents came from San Diego. And the night that we were there, the first night, I was like, look, I mean, you're never going to get stars like that because light pollution ruins it. But it's like even those things, it's just something you take for granted that you don't ever really connect with the world in that way. And so I thought that was one of the more important parts of your journey back is to find that again.
I mean, you can bring that back into the city with you too. It's like, I live in this old 1940s neighborhood in Tucson, and the houses are all different. Everybody's yard's different, and there's different trees. And I might walk in the dog. I'm just trying to do the same thing. If I hear a bird song, I'll try and find the bird in the tree with my eyes, and I'll try and just notice as much as I can. And I mean, partly as a way of just keeping my senses alive, and partly of just it makes me feel just slightly more alive in the world, which is a good thing.
Before we part ways, I do want to give a chance to talk about what it's been like to be back in Mississippi this week, because you do miss it in many ways. So what are the feelings that have gone on the last week with bringing your book here?
Well, I mean, as ever, it's a mixture. So, my plane got in, plane was 4 hours late, which seems to be about standard these days. But then it took like 35 minutes to get the bags into the carousel. And then I go to the car rental office and the printer's broken, so they can't print me a contract for the rental car. They say, look, if the cops stop you, just get them to call this office. Like, ask for Larry, I'll vouch for you. I was like, oh, Mississippi, here we are again. And then I was driving into downtown Jackson on Old Brandon Road, and I nearly hit this homeless guy who was a black guy wearing all black clothes, like walking in the middle of the road. I missed him, but I don't know. But it just shook me up really badly.
Yeah,
and
welcome back.
About 90 seconds after that, I hit a huge pothole and damaged the tire on the rental car, and then so I go back to the car rental agency the next morning because my tire was like down to 12, and I kind of limp in there and say, and the guy, again, a really nice guy, but he'd lost his keys, so he couldn't open up the office. It's like, well, there's a gas station up there, put some tire in. So I just put some air in the tire and like got up to Oxford and managed to fix it there. But it was just, so there was that kind of rickety Mississippi quality. But then on the other hand, I mean, I've got to spend time with at least 20 people that I just adore and was missing really badly. And it's just been wonderful to see them again and to see, I mean, this book festival, I mean, the enthusiasm for books and literatures is just a marvel here.
To me, it doesn't exist in any other book fest. This is the one that I love the most. And it's because of that spirit, the enthusiasm for reading and the support of authors and friends, meeting new friends, seeing old friends. So sometimes I just wish I could just come and sit in the middle on the ground and just watch everybody.
Yeah.
It makes me feel good.
Now, this is absolutely my favorite book festival. I mean, partly it's because, I know people here. There's just a lot of people. There's a lot of fantastic people in Mississippi. There really are.
Well, I can say when I first started coming to Mississippi and talking about your books, you have a ton of fans here, a ton of friends, a ton of people that support you. And now you have another bookseller in North Carolina that will hand sell your book to anyone that walks in.
Right.
But this was truly a treat, Richard, and I thank you for your writing, and I hope that you write many more books because I will definitely love them as much as all the other ones.
All right. Well, thanks for the conversation, Matt.
Cool.